So when I married into Jen's family, I married into this family of very outdoorsy fisherman type dudes, which I am not. And they just keep telling me stories, keep filling me in on life with the outdoors. Jen's grandfather apparently was an unbelievable, he was a logger, and he could fish like nobody's business, hunt like nobody's business. And Jen's dad has three brothers, he has two brothers, three boys, and they were just outdoorsy kids. I mean, they knew how to do this stuff. And Jen's dad, his dad, so Jen's grandpa, just passed away a few years ago. But when he talks about his dad, he just lights up when you start talking about fishing. And he told me one time, and I love this, he said, okay, he was the best fisherman in Whatcom County. It's like, how awesome is that? It's so like Dukes of Hazzard, isn't it? Like the best fisherman in Whatcom County. And so one time he was talking about this, and I said, well, like what was his secret? Like what made him so good? And Jen's dad got kind of this little half smile, and he said, man, he could just think like a fish. He could just think like a fish, which apparently is the key to being a good fisherman, okay? And I'm told by Jen's dad and by others that fish aren't really very complex creatures. To a fish, life is about the maximum gratification of appetite at the minimum expenditure of energy. Okay, to a fish, life is see the food, want the food, eat the food. And that's about it. And then we just swim around. Like a rainbow trout never really reflects on where its life is headed. You think about it, like a girl steelhead rarely says to a boy steelhead, you know, I don't feel like you're as committed to our relationship as I am. I feel like you just kind of want me for my body. And fish don't usually say stuff like that. They're mostly just like this collection of appetites. Okay, a fish is pretty much a stomach, a mouth, and a pair of eyes. You know, like fish are not known to be brilliant. We talk about, and we talked about this last week even a little bit, we talk about clever animals. You know, like foxes or like raccoons or elephants or monkeys. Fish are not usually put into that group. Like if someone tells you that you're about as smart as a fish, that's not a good thing. I mean, fish are just dumb. And it's really kind of amazing because when you think about this, the same tactics for catching fish keep working year after year after year. Like, hey, fish, swallow this. It's not the real thing. Like, it's just a lure. You think it'll feed you, okay, but it won't. And what's worse, it'll trap you. And if you were to look closely, fish, you'd see that it's wrapped around a hook that's connected to a line. And so if you bite, it's just a matter of time before your enemy reels you in. Fish never seem to figure this out. Now, you'd think that fish would learn from all of their fish friends who go for a lure and then fly off into outer space. But they don't learn. And it's kind of ironic because what do we call a group of fish? We say they swim together in a school. They go to school. But they never learn. It's a lot like what happens over at Wazoo. Oh, man, I love you, Haley. And just so you all know, I'm kidding. I mean, Washington State grads are way smarter than fish. I say that like I'm a Husky or something. I'm not. I went to Western Washington, for crying out loud. Okay, back to the point. I've digressed. Fish are not very smart. And they fall for this bait thing over and over and over. And so aren't you glad that people are a lot smarter than fish? Brilliant man with a great desire to change the world goes into politics. And he has the backing and he has the potential to do immeasurable good. Until it becomes known that he's been sleeping with prostitutes. His career is over. All the good that could have been will not be. His family is blown apart, and his children never look at him the same. Young girl wants to be popular. She wants to be liked. She wants to be part of the inner circle. She wants to be liked by the boys. So she decides to get friendly with them, a lot of them. And pretty soon, names are whispered about her. And she finds that the girls don't really want to be her friend anymore. The boys do, but only for one reason. And she finds that it hasn't worked out quite the way that she'd hoped. A pastor who becomes famous for his preaching against sexual sin, and his secret private life turns out to be living kind of like a stomach and a mouth and a pair of eyes. A husband with a sexual addiction lives for years in secret guilt. Feels like he can never really be close to God. He can never fully be known by his wife. A wife goes through a dry time in her marriage. Now, it's repairable until she gets hooked into an emotional attachment with another man, not her husband. And it eventually blows up everything. And you just go on and on and on. And it turns out, I think if we're realistic, it turns out some people actually do have a problem. Now, aren't you glad that you and I don't? Aren't you glad that we're all strong, healthy, sane, normal people? In the Sermon on the Mount, like the most famous speech in the history of the world, Jesus addresses this, you know what, I'm healthy thinking. This, you know what, I'm sure glad that I don't have a problem like those people thinking. And we tend to think of his sermon as this deeply or highly elevated spiritual talk. Things, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And it is it is very, very deep and very, very spiritual. But at the same time, it is that way because it's also deeply earthy. It's very practical. And it's so powerful because Jesus addresses the common issues of everyday life. And very early on in this talk, Jesus kind of says to the crowd, all right, let's talk about sex. And the real question that he seems to be getting at with the crowd is, who is it that's actually got issues when it comes to sexuality? And here's what Jesus says. This is Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 and 28. He says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So Jesus starts with this, you've heard it said, okay, do not commit adultery. And this is a reference to one of the 10 commandments. And it very literally means, okay, if you're married, then don't have sex with someone other than your spouse. Because adultery, it means betrayal, and it means deceit, and it leads to catastrophic damage, and it leads to pain, and it's wrong. It's always wrong. It always violates God's will. And some of you know very much about that kind of pain. But Jesus noticed that some people, like the Pharisees, the religious leaders that were standing kind of on the periphery listening to all of this, thought that because they had never actually committed adultery, that they were then perfect and righteous on this front of sexuality. And they'd get kind of smug, kind of superior. But they were still broken, as we all are. And their brokenness was affecting their sexuality, as it always does. And they still needed God, as we all do. And Jesus wants to get at this. He wants to get underneath the surface of just the outward behavior. And so he illustrates this by talking about how even these guys who thought they were all good were still capable of giving what we might call the look. You ever been in a restaurant where there's a husband and a wife at a table, and then a waitress walks by? Now maybe she's attractive, or maybe she's just dressed in a certain way, and the husband starts staring at her, can't take his eyes off of her. Just his eyes follow her around everywhere. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I know we've never experienced this ourselves. But we've seen other people do this kind of thing. And the husband is not now thinking of this other woman as a person, like as somebody's mom or somebody's sister or somebody's daughter, a person that uniquely bears the image of God. She's just body parts. And he's just using her. He's just watching her to get a little surge of gratification. And he's giving her, what we will call for this morning, the look. And he thinks that nobody notices. But his wife knows. And every time she sees him do it, and she sees it far more than he realizes it, she feels devalued, and she feels threatened, and she feels humiliated. So Jesus says, look, that's not God's heart for marriage or for relationships or for sexuality. Like, here's the thing, guys. Sexual purity and faithfulness goes way, way beyond like adultery avoidance. Just because you're not sleeping around doesn't mean that everything's okay on the sexuality front. He says, so some of you who think of yourselves as like sexually righteous, you're capable of engaging all day long in what we might call the look. Okay, now a quick word on this. Jesus is not saying here that it is a sin to notice that somebody's attractive. Okay? Because you may have noticed this. We've all been created male and female. And so the sense of attraction, the sizzle, the chemistry, the sexual desire has actually been hardwired into us by God. And that's a good thing. So, question. At what age do you get beyond noticing attractive people? When you die. Attraction is a huge part of what it is to be human, and that's a very good thing, And so Jesus isn't talking about that. The critical distinction, and this is a big deal, because people think oh man, Jesus is saying that I'm not supposed to have any sense of attraction or sexual desire, and you know what? Reality, I could never do that, and the truth is, I don't think I'd even want to. But Jesus is talking about something else. He's talking about something deeper. He's talking about looking very specifically for the purpose of lusting. In other words, an element of will has to enter into this. And it's allowing the mind then to dwell on it and to kind of wallow there and to start maybe playing out scenes in the mind. And then this can become so habitual that we're hardly even aware that we're doing it. And of course, it can be done very much by women as well as by men. But see, Jesus's main concern here is not just adultery, and it's not even adultery and the look. His concern is all the ways that God's will is not being done on earth in every realm of human life. And that absolutely includes sexuality. And Jesus' point is that there's sexual brokenness and therefore sexual problems in everybody. And we all need God's help. Now, let me just give you a few examples of how this can kind of manifest itself. And you see if maybe some of this hits home for you. There's the problem of the look, which again can become so habitual that we're not even aware that we're doing it. Now, there's the problem of the treatment of people, then, who don't attract the look. People who get overlooked or they're undervalued. There's all kinds of research around this now. People who don't get hired or people who don't get promoted as quickly or they don't get raises as quickly or they don't get recognized because they don't happen to fit our culture's stereotype of what it is to be sexy. And of course, it's almost impossible for someone to complain about this because then you put yourself in this whole other category, like in our society of being kind of a loser, kind of a reject. So you don't want to call anybody's attention to the reality that this is happening. Then there's the problem of judgmentalism, spiritual superiority, like this refusal to extend love and grace to people that are battling through sexual issues. To think, I am better than those sexual sinners over there. To self-righteously ignore my own issues because, hey, at least I'm not doing what they're doing. There's the problem of allowing my whole identity to be based on my ability to attract the look. Can drive my whole image of who I am, my identity. And of course, it gets expensive to do that. And the older you get, some of you maybe notice it, the older you get, the more expensive it gets. I'm noticing that. Then there's the problem of being jealous of the attractive people. There's a problem of millions of hours and dollars that are devoted to porn. There's the problem of sexual frustration in marriage. There's a problem of parents refusing to talk openly with their kids about sexuality. There's the problem of sexual harassment all over our culture. There's the problem of people who appear in control on the surface, but really they carry deep sexual regrets or histories or addictions. And these are even heavier for them because nobody knows, and they're all alone in this thing. And the point is that God's heart is broken over the current state of human sexuality. It is a big, fat mess in our world. And so, who's got issues when it comes to sexuality? We all do. Okay, we've all been the victim of it to some degree or another, and we've all contributed to the perpetuating of the problem to some degree or another. You know, look, if everybody in this room that's wrestling with mismanaged sexuality suddenly just vanished, I'd be speaking to an empty room. Because, of course, I'd still be here. It's kind of like the preacher who one time said to his congregation, "Everybody who wrestles with lust, your tongue will stick to the roof of your mouth." We're all broken people. And that brokenness affects us in all kinds of arenas of life, and sexuality is one of those. And I want to talk specifically to single guys about this for a second. Okay, being a single guy that's trying to follow Christ is like really hard. Like the issue of lust is a big deal. I used to, when I was up at Western, I was, in like accountability groups with guys, and you would not believe the things that they put money on, how long they could go without, and someone would take the pot, and it was crazy, okay? And it was a big deal. It was a struggle with all kinds of stuff. And there were just a whole slew of single guys that I went to school with up there, guys that really were committed to trying to honor God with their sexuality. And toward the end of my time up at Western, some of those guys started to get married. And so I went to a lot of weddings, including my own. And it was really funny because the guys that stayed single, they were kind of afraid to ever go over and visit their married friends. At least they were afraid to stop by unannounced. And maybe that was a good thing. It's probably polite and probably a good idea. But the thinking behind all of that was kind of flawed. A lot of these single guys sort of envisioned that once couples marry, they pretty much just live at home naked all the time. And they sort of had this vision, this image in their mind of marriage as like fantasy land. Now, okay, just to be clear, God is absolutely in favor of full sexual expression, like of deep intimacy in marriage, like of exploration and of sensuality, of enjoyment, okay? But what some of my single friends fail to realize is that once you get married, life can get kind of complicated. Like work happens. Some of you may realize this. Work happens. Like you can't just have sex all day long. Work happens. And then tiredness happens. And then balancing checkbooks happens. And then headaches happen. It's like they actually do sometimes. Kids happen. Like 2 or 3 preschoolers can happen. And all of a sudden, guys can kind of find themselves in this world of going, this does not feel like Fantasyland. It feels like Tomorrowland. It feels like Never Never Land at times. And a lot of single guys sort of have this thought of, it's like, okay, well, right now, see, because, I'm single and I have no outlet for this, I am a raging bowl of just hormones that are flying. And so, I've got some issues with lust. But when I'm married, okay, and the bull is let out of the cage, baby, and it's fantasy land, this is going to be unbelievable. No more issues. Let me say, wrong. Age does not fix this. Okay, guys, single guys, age does not fix this, and marriage does not fix this. The first step in moving forward in this, if this is what you want to do, is to embrace God's vision for sexuality. To come to a place where we then say, you know what, I actually believe that there's greater freedom and greater joy and a deeper life when I resist lust. And I want to be the kind of person that gets beyond objectifying people all the time and just seeing them as body parts. Now, we live in a world, and you know this because it's coming at you all the time. Have you ever noticed that sometimes, like in advertising, they use sex? You notice that? It's like it's coming at you all the time. And we live in this world that says to us, it is absolutely crazy to even try to resist lust. It's unnatural, it's unnecessary, and it's just plain stupid. So why restrict yourself? Why limit yourself? Why not be free to think however you want? And really, when you get right at this, it comes down to a definition of freedom. Okay, now I'm talking to all men. I just want you to imagine a scenario with me. You're at the gym. Are you there? And there's nice-looking female worker-outers. Okay, or you're in your car, and there's a jogger, or there's a billboard, and normally you'd look, and you'd try to get that surge. And maybe you would do this without even thinking about it. It would just be so automatic. But this time, you stop and you say to yourself, wait a minute, I actually don't have to look. I actually don't have to objectify that person. I actually have the freedom to choose not to look. And you don't. And you find that it feels really good not to look. And you discover like this little strength, like this little power that you didn't even know that you had. And you find this new strength beginning to well up. It's like a muscle. Every time you use it, it gets a little bit stronger. And you find that when you're doing this and when you're using this, you actually feel free. Because see, here's the thing. Lust promises freedom. It says that you can be free to gratify your appetites as much as you want. So it's just like, see the bait, want the bait, eat the bait. And when you do, you just kind of let lust be your master. It promises freedom, but in the end, it makes you a slave because there's always a hook. True freedom is not this external freedom to gratify every appetite. It's this internal freedom to not be enslaved by our appetites, to have a place to stand so that I'm actually not mastered by them, to be more than a stomach and a mouth and a pair of eyes. And the question, of course, when you get right down to it in following Jesus is, do I really want that? Like, do I want to approach this whole thing differently? And if so, then Jesus gives us kind of a game plan to deal with this. And he gets shockingly graphic here, and these are famous words. Most of you are very familiar with these. This is what he says as he continues on in verses 29 and 30. He says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Okay, now, I think we can all agree that Jesus is probably not advocating self-mutilation here. He isn't saying, okay, guys, if you can't stop lusting, then just put your eyes out. But he is making a serious point with a serious illustration. He's saying you may need to set up some boundaries in your life. You may need to give up on some of your prized personal freedom in order to protect yourself. And this comes back to the nature of freedom. In our culture, freedom is being able to do whatever you want. Freedom is having the ability to fully pursue and gratify all of your desires. But Jesus would disagree with that idea of freedom wholeheartedly. Jesus would say, actually, there's a way that leads to life. A way that leads to joy and wholeness that is inexpressible And freedom, guys, freedom is learning to engage fully in that life. Now, we faced this kind of a dilemma at our house several years ago. When my son Cameron, who's now 13, when he was about 6 or so, he liked cookies and he liked candy. And I know that this is like appalling to some of you, especially for a pastor's kid, because they're perfect. But when we weren't looking, sometimes he would eat them without permission. So we would find crumbs and we would find wrappers in various places. And it got serious enough that we felt like it was time to have an intervention. And so Jen and I sat Cameron down, and Jen I have to say, this is one of the most brilliant moments I've ever seen of her in my life. It was brilliant. But we sat her down, and Jen just kind of took the lead, and she said, Cam, you like cookies and candy. We get it, okay? But there's a limit to how much you should eat, and there's a right time for it. And you seem to be having trouble. And Cam said, so Jen asked, okay, well, sweetheart, when you sneak stuff, how does it make you feel? And Cam said, it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel ashamed. It makes me feel afraid, like worried that I'm going to get caught. And Jen said, do you like living like that? And he said, no. She said, well, we don't really like that you're living like that either, okay? And we want you to have cookies. We really do. But you need to have the right amount, and you need to have them at the right time. And this sneaking thing is really not good for your heart. And she said, so little buddy, what do we need to do to help you with this? Do we need to not have any cookies or any candy in our house ever? And Cam said, I don't like that idea. And so Jen said, well, honey, what can we do to help you with this? How can we help you develop better self-control? And so the 6-year-old boy said, and I found this impressively insightful. He said, well, and he couldn't even say it's ours at the time. He's like, it would be helpful if they weren't on the counter. Because when I see them all the time, I think about eating them. So he says, could you put them where I can't see them? And then because I'll know where they are in the cupboard, and because I'll be tempted to go in there and get one, could you put a little note on them that says, Cam, this is not a good idea. It's not worth it. Mom. And so we said, sweetheart, we want to honor your wishes. And we did that. And we prayed with him for strength. We really did this. The three of us held hands in a little circle, and we prayed for his dark little heart. And it was a powerful spiritual moment in his life. Because he made a decision that day to resist his desires. And for him, it was the beginning of freedom. And it was the beginning of having a right relationship with Mom and I. And eventually, and they're not like there haven't ever been any other struggles with that kind of thing, but eventually he got beyond this sort of see the cookie, want the cookie, eat the cookie mentality. But he had to confess. And he had to admit that in him there was some level of weakness. And he had to ask for some help. And he had to have some boundaries set. Now, this is, I think, a little bit closer to what Jesus was getting at than poking your eye out. Because blindness wasn't really, his goal. You go into every Christian community and all the men are blind. But the idea was that accountability, boundaries are are a big deal. Accountability is a big deal. Talking to people openly about our struggles, that's a big deal. Confession with people who truly love you and truly want the best for you and are willing to step up to help you is very, very powerful. And there's a young man in one of our life groups that kind of found himself in a similar situation. And so over the last year or so, he's kind of been confessing his struggles and asking for help from our group, and specifically from Jen and I. And it's been a very, very powerful thing in his life. Now, I know that this is important. What's said in group stays in group, unless the pastor asks you to come up and tell it to the whole church. And because this guy just went to Haiti and actually voluntarily included this in some of the stuff that he told them about his life and his love for Jesus, I thought maybe he'd be willing to share this with you guys as well. And so I asked him, and he is. And so I've asked Casey Ellersick to come up today and share. But before he does that, Casey made a decision. Let me just kind of set this up. Casey made a decision very recently to get very serious in his own life about the look, to get real serious about honoring women and honoring God. And so he reached out to me and to Jen and to a few other people in a very real way to ask for help. And so I've asked Casey to come up here and tell you guys a little bit about that. So would you welcome Casey as he comes?
It's my first time with that. So it's kind of nice not having to spend a half hour talking about my tattoo and why I have tattoos, because I was being in Haiti, so I can kind of just get into what I want to get into. So yeah, like Jason was talking about, like many guys, I struggled a lot, and it was a very ongoing battle with lust, and in particular in the department of pornography. It had effects on my faith. It had effects in past relationships I was in. As far as all the sins of my life, this was the one that really had the biggest stronghold on my life. Before I chose to start using Covenant Eyes, it's an internet accountability site that Jason's going to talk a little bit more about when I'm off here. It was a big just addiction in my life. And, sure, there'd be weeks where I'd hear a really strong message, and I'd really think, oh man, I need to cut this out. I need to stop doing this. And, that'd go strong for about a month or two, and then I'd be right back into the same habits. It was a serious problem, and the worst thing is no one knew about it. It was a thing that I kind of kept to myself. So I first heard about Covenant Eyes after a life group. I kind of brought up my struggles to Jen and to Jason. And, they kind of explained what it was about, and I was like, okay, that could work, I like the sound of that. But I was hesitant to use it. I was, like anyone who has an addiction, it becomes very normal to you. And, it becomes easy, you're afraid of what life would be without it. But at the same time, I hated it. I hated just the hold it had on my life. I hated knowing that, I was letting God down, what he thought of me during these times. And part of me kind of wanted to beat it on my own and not need other people's help. But, in all honesty, I kind of knew I would always cave eventually, no matter how many months I kind of went strong. So before we take communion here, Jason always tells us to really evaluate ourselves and to be honest with God before we eat the bread and drink the juice. And I do this, I bring up the sins that's really current on my heart. But there's only one sin that I have to bring up every single time during communion, and it's that. And that just kind of dawned on me one day, and I was like, man, this is an issue that I have to bring it up every single time. There's no other thing in my life that I have to do that with. So a few months back, I was listening to an online sermon, and the preacher was talking about burning the bridges to the things that really separate us from God and that keep us from having a full relationship with Him. And the pastor, he gave 3 examples of this bridge burning faith, and one of them was a man who struggled with an addiction to pornography. He struggled for years and years. He put up blocks on his computer, but he'd always kind of find loopholes around it. He'd get his computer monitored, but he'd kind of always find ways back. He had his iPhone, and that's just as bad as having a computer. So this guy, he eventually went and traded his iPhone in to get a flip phone. Like, he was going to do everything he could to keep himself from experiencing God's relationship. So that night, after I heard that, I went home and I downloaded Covenant Eyes. I emailed Jen. I was like, hey, I really want to get going with this. It kind of just really rejuvenated me. And, I was tired of knowing exactly what it was that was keeping me from having a full relationship with God and doing nothing about it. And I think a lot of us kind of get caught up in thinking that our struggles and our fights are something we have to deal with on our own, where in reality, we're in a community here, and we can depend on others. We can let people into our struggles and the fights we're engaged in. We grow with the help of others, and in turn, they grow with our help. Sure, it requires courage and humility, and it requires that we trust each other. Hold on. But I'll tell you right now, it makes a world's difference knowing that you have someone in your corner fighting with you, fighting alongside with you, who cares just as much as you do to get this out of your life. So each month, my brother Tony and Jen, they get a report of my internet use on both my computer and my iPhone. And these are two people who I have a lot of respect for. They're two people who have been a huge help in my walk with Jesus. And they're two people who I'd hate to disappoint. And kind of in closing, just knowing that I'm not alone in this battle anymore, and knowing that I have support, it has made such a difference, and it has helped a lot. And most importantly, I feel closer with God through this. I kind of feel like He's been saying to me lately, He's like, I've just been waiting to see your faith, and I've just been waiting to see you fight for me. Now that I've seen that, okay, let's really go to work together. It's time to go. So, Jace, that's kind of all I got for you guys. Oh, goodness.
Just power it off. Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, man.
So, like I said, Casey was with us in Haiti a couple weeks ago, and he was, we were at youth events, and he was standing up preaching, essentially, and I was like, man, this guy's really good. He's a good speaker. He organizes words and thoughts well. I was like, we've got to get him, speaking at Brookview about something at some point. And then this topic came, and it hit me, and I thought, hey, Casey, you want a chance to speak at church? And that took a lot of courage. And the whole process for him has taken a tremendous amount of courage. And you know that you're serious about kicking something when you're sending all of your internet activity to your pastor's wife. That's pretty impressive. And I'm just so excited for you and the journey that you're on with God and the decisions that you're making. It's unbelievable. Inside of your bulletin, he mentioned Covenant Eyes. What Covenant Eyes is it's software that you willingly download on whatever your electronic device is, your iPad or your iTouch or your phone or your computer, your laptop, whatever it is, and it monitors what happens, and then it sends a report to people, and it doesn't block anything, doesn't prevent you from going anywhere, but it tells on you if you do. And for a lot of guys, that is enough. I mean, that is enough to not have that issue. And for me, Jen also gets my report, and it's on my computer, and it's now on my phone, and that's kind of a new thing that you're able to put it on your phone, which is a big deal. And so there's no shame in that. It's a really, really helpful thing. And we live in a culture that just says, well, why would you do that? We do that because we love Jesus. And we do it because we're embracing his vision for what life can be and should be. And for a lot of people, there's, in this whole arena of sexuality, there's this thought of, wow, it seems like it's really extreme with Jesus, and seems, and I get that. I get that. But for me, I'll just tell you straight up, for me, I've come to trust Jesus so much with every other area of life that I say, even even this area, even though I may not be able to explain fully and give all the rationale why I should be this strict with it and this rigid with it, I'm going to do it because I trust you. Because I trust that you love me, and I trust that you're trying to lead me into the best life possible. And if that means I have to give up a bunch of freedom in certain arenas to live that life and to experience what you're offering to me as fully as I can, I'm going to do it. And guys, here's the thing. God's plan is to create a new humanity where women and men with transformed hearts, increasingly transformed hearts, live together in Christ in such a way that they learn to honor the image of God in one another. And they learn to treat each other like brothers and like sisters. I mean, God's ultimate dream for us is to get sexuality right. Now, in recognizing that none of us have it right, not perfectly, like how do we as broken people move toward wholeness? It has to start by simply embracing God's dream for sexuality. Coming to a point where I say, I actually want to be free from all the junk. God, show me what sexuality is meant to be. Teach me what it looks like and how to begin to live in it. And God, I want to get started on this not a year from now, not 2 years from now, not 5 months from now. I want to get started on this now, right now, today. Because God is wanting to start something new in you and in me. He's wanting to create an entirely new kind of community, one that the world had never seen before prior to Jesus. And that community will inevitably be made up of all kinds of broken people that are broken in all kinds of ways. And so no matter what your past or even your present situation is, God is inviting you into something new and something beautiful with Him. See, because of Jesus, this is now possible for ordinary broken people. And Jesus started the sermon with this. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit now. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those that don't look strong and they don't look spiritual and they don't look like the kind of people that God would be interested in. Blessed now are the not just the winners that society says are blessed. Not blessed now are not just the supermodels. Now, like that's our society. Blessed are the supermodels. But blessed are, not just blessed are the rich that can like attract a trophy spouse. Jesus says, no. Blessed are the wrinkled. Blessed are the misshapen. Blessed are those that never got asked to the prom, never got asked to the dance. Blessed are the single. Blessed are the married. Blessed are the prostitutes. Blessed are the addicted. Blessed are the regretful. Blessed are you if you have been ashamed for a long time and you just kept looking at person after person. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. We've all had issues with mismanaged sexuality, every one of us. And some of you are filled with so much regret and so much shame in this area. And so I just tell you, I wish that I had words tender enough to say this last part. You have to remember that there's no hurt that God cannot heal. And there is no sin that God will not forgive. And you may have suffered horrible betrayal or abuse or pain, and there is a God who specializes in wiping away every tear. There is a loving God, and He's present in our world, and He's active in it, and healing is what He does. Maybe you've made, horrible choices. Maybe you've violated promises, betrayed some of your deepest values. Okay, listen, God is saying to you, no, blessed are you. Blessed are you. Because the kingdom of God has invaded this earth in Jesus. Healing and wholeness are now available to anybody, like anybody at all. And Jesus just insisted everywhere he went, you can repent, you can turn and go another direction right now because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he just insisted on it. He would see religious people, he would see irreligious people, he would see people that were broken, he would see people that were sick, he would see people that everybody had cast aside. And Jesus would say, no, the kingdom of God is available to you, and it's available to you right now, right here. The kingdom of heaven has come near, he would say. Life together with God, in God's favor, in God's presence, that has now become available on earth to very ordinary people. The realm where things God are as God wants them to be is now here. It's among you. It's all around you, and it's available to you, and you can enter into it.